Look like an innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Those around us, they are not as they seem. Society forces a face upon people just to keep clear of criticism, hate, discrimination. But seeing it firsthand, it changes you. It all happened within a week. Those closest can become the furthest away. Under a week is all it takes to see a person for who, or rather, what they truly are. Years ago, back in the summer of 2012, a new neighbor had decided to move in next door to me. It appeared that they had come alone. It looked like a lady, a pretty one too. She seemed to come with very little though. One tiny van dropped off her belongings in her garage, and that was it. She appeared quite mysterious. She would always cover her face when she left the house in the morning. I would notice her black top fly about in the wind, having to stop myself from staring too much as to not seem creepy. Once I returned home from work each day, I would usually notice her in the window of her house, glaring at me from above. The glare felt ominous and rather intimidating, but some strange feeling of intimacy arose from it, so I became inclined to finally talk to her. Perhaps she was just a bit anxious about meeting new people. This was only Monday. The early morning sky appeared dim. A shroud of moisture consumed the air, and combined with my nervous sweating, left me rather uncomfortable. Ignoring my discomfort, I quickly snapped out of my thoughts and made my way down the stairs of my porch to go and talk to the neighbor as she left her house. I was worried that she would take it as harassment of some kind, so I made sure to be cautious when approaching her. Hey there, I'm Ben. Sorry to interrupt you, but I couldn't help but to notice you. She stopped abruptly. I was rather shocked by the sudden pause and found it odd that she kept her head facing forward, as if to hear me out and then continue with her day. Or maybe there was something else. Sorry, I didn't mean to stop you. How are you finding the new Quiet! Her voice was shrill and immediately pierced my ears with the wretched sound of severity. After her command, she stood still for a few more moments, as if to let the awkwardness of the situation set in. And once those few moments of pure silence came to an end, she continued walking towards the car, her legs powered with haste to get away from me. I felt entirely bewildered by it all. The woman had let me speak barely a few words, and it was already a no. I mean, rejection is normal, but whatever that was, wasn't. Maybe I'll try again tomorrow. This time I would knock on her door and maybe bring her something to give her, and so I could quench my curious thirst to see her face. The next day, Tuesday, was one of the worser incidents of it all. I woke up feeling a raging sense of being watched coursing through me. I got up swiftly to go check the windows and bathroom, but there was nobody there. I was just being silly. At least that's what I thought. I went downstairs to go and retrieve the tray of cookies that I had baked yesterday for the girl. It wasn't much, and my experience with women wasn't the greatest, but cookies seemed right for the situation. It was that or another deathly silence, so I really didn't have a better option. It was around 9 a.m. Outside was dreary and freezing cold. Leaving the house, I felt the sparks of shivers run down my spine, both from the temperature and from my heightened nervousness. I crossed over my lawn onto hers with a slight rush in my movement. The cold wind felt sharp as it smacked against my face while I hurried over to her house. The door suddenly flung open in front of me. I leapt back in fright at the woman standing completely still in the doorway, her head facing the floor, and a horrific silence consumed us both. I thought I would try to act more confident and make us both feel more comfortable, but before I could even speak, she let out a demonic growl and spoke. "Leave. Do not come again, or he'll get you." She slammed the door shut, but no footsteps came from the other side. She must still be waiting there, waiting for me to leave. As for myself, I stood, mouth ajar, confused about what the hell just happened. I wanted to give her the cookies, but that voice, there was something darker going on behind that face, and curiosity inclined me to discover what it was. Then Wednesday came, and the sun glimmered across the mist, creating a glistening effect that had engulfed the area. The woman had just left and was walking to her car, but compared to her usual hurried pace, she was far slower today. Each step appeared almost calculated enough so that she could hear anyone else's footsteps approaching nearby. But today, she wouldn't hear nor see any, for it was her house that I wanted to inspect. Eventually, she reached her car. Watching from my porch, I observed as she stood motionless in front of her car, almost as if she hesitated to get in at all, waiting for something to happen. But once she felt that it was safe enough, she grabbed the handle and flung it open. She was now inside and ready to drive off. Fortunately, she didn't hesitate to drive off, and she was out of sight within just a few moments. Now, it was my time. I grabbed my bag and sprinted over to her house. There were a lot of windows, so I started checking to see if maybe the ones next to the front door were locked, only to find the door itself to be wide open. How odd. I made my way inside hesitantly, as if expecting something to welcome me on the other side. But through the door, I saw nothing. The house was completely barren, and there wasn't a single bit of furniture lying anywhere, all except for a singular painting which hung up in the middle of the hallway. I walked up slowly to get a better look. It was a picture of a lady with a twisted face. Her mouth appeared to wrap around the sides of her cheeks, and her eyes sunk deep into the back of her skull. Her nose rising up and bending with her displaced teeth. The picture was horrific. Why would anyone hang something like this up in the middle of the... "What are you doing here?" A shrill voice came from behind me. "I told you to stay away, or he would find you." With fear striking down my spine, I carefully turned my head to look back towards the woman dressed in black standing behind me, her face still glaring at the ground. "If I ever see you roaming this place again, I'll burn your house down, with you inside. Now leave! He's almost here." A pounding set of footsteps boomed from upstairs. My blood froze, and my body surged with panic. I darted out past the door, running past her and running straight for my house. Looking back, I saw the woman standing there, and then a large pair of hands closed the door in front of her. Whatever was in that house, it was horrifying. I believe the painting that I saw, it was actually that woman. Yes, it must have been her face. That's why she always covered it. And the scary thing is, who knows what more he had done to her. But I managed to escape. And since that day, I never dared to look back. For he could still be there, waiting to do the same horrific things to me.
Too scared to subscribe?
I made an attempt to focus on the screen in front of me for the upteenth time, but the noise returned. I eyed the volume of work I had to do. Sheets of paper scattered around my desk, and on the panel of the computer, numbers which my concentration could have clarified appeared like puzzles in the most complicated maze. I pressed my fingers together and struggled. Whatever the fuck was wrong with Jim, I cursed under my breath. The noise had gone on for too long, at least 3 weeks since I had observed it. Every evening around 8 p.m. when I had taken a shower and sat in front of my workstation, I would hear a feminine laughter, muffled by the border of the walls that divided both our apartments. It did not bother me that he had such ravenous taste for women. I was sure that it was a different woman each time because I had been attentive enough to notice the sounds of their laughter and subsequent conversation. It was difficult to make a distinct meaning of what was being said, but the pitch was traceable. I snatched my keys from my desk and walked to the door in annoyance. I put in my key and turned it. The door opened and immediately I heard a piercing screech, bestial but feminine. The screeching noise echoed with a heavy, manly grunt, like one whipping all of his strength. That fucking bastard. I cursed as my male member began to grow between my thighs. I envied his carnal thrill, and I pondered on the usefulness of going to disturb his pleasures. I turned my hands over to check the time. The digital surface of the watch revealed the time to be minutes past 9 p.m. I pushed my door as if to close it. He could have all the fun in the world, I thought to myself. I had work to do. I was about to push the door shut when the screaming returned to fill the air with a surprising urgency. It didn't seem to me to be one of pleasure, but some people enjoyed their nighttime throws that way, I assumed. Yet, I thought it was curious. My door clicked as a dozen thoughts raced through my mind. The pressure confused me, and I slowed it all down by inhaling deeply. I thought of Jim, and his image appeared in the back of my mind. He was just like any other man I had known. He seemed to know a lot, but I chalked it up to the fact that he was just an attentive person. He had such shiny hair, slicked back and never ruffled whenever I saw him. He had the fullest smile whenever he spoke to me. He was kind and he offered gifts and helped whenever he could. He had been responsible for setting up my light bulbs when they had gone out. He had been gracious enough to help with the fanciful tiny light bulbs that beautified my workshop with a bright glow. He took care of himself, even in his house, and nothing was out of place. Nothing was out of place. How would I even know that? It struck me as deliberate. Something had to be out of place. I never quite paid attention to what he was doing, and if it was in my space, I managed my way through it. We only saw each other a few times, and when we shook hands each, his hands clasped around mine like a vice. Jim. I muttered his name under my breath as I slowly walked back to my workstation. My head spun. I didn't even know my neighbor's surname. I was so busy with work and my own affairs that I had been oblivious to the entire existence. I did not know for what he did for a living or who it was he went out with. I rebuked myself for thinking like an eavesdropping old maid, but I felt unsettled by the noise of his grunting beating through the walls. My eyes went to my workstation, and I wondered what I would have occupied myself with if I did not think too much about Jim. I heard one final grunt, and the blow struck me to my chest, even as my mind raced. I had never seen any of these girls. I spread my fingers and held my hands out in thought when the thought settled. My head was a whirlpool of panic, and I felt warm all over. I was oozing with uncomfortable, clammy sweat immediately. I turned back to the door and hurriedly shoved my key into the keyhole. I turned the lock and pulled it open. I raced to his door and lifted my hands to bang on the surface of his door. The door opened up before I made contact with it. A grimace instinctively came over my panicked face. He stuck his head out of the door gap with a grin on his face, looking nothing like the Jim I knew. His hair was tousled as though he had been in a struggle, but he still had his clothes on. I managed to hide my concern by feigning a return to his smile. "Hello, Mike," he said, seemingly ready for me. I swallowed. "Hey, Jim. How are you doing?" "Fantastic. It's going swell." He answered with a follow-up giggle that was clearly forced. Good. Great. I know what you're doing, man. I muttered slowly, and he moved up to the door. I watched him carefully cradle the door, squeezing his grip through the pane. Interesting. And what do you think that is? He asked. The mood immediately turned darker with tension. Jim did not seem like the neighbor who had such a beautiful smile anymore, and his answers stuck to my throat. His right foot edged forward by the door, and my heart jerked. You're fucking like a stallion, man. Good God. You were about to bring the roof down while I was simply trying to work. I lied awkwardly. His face lit up slowly. Oh, that. Whew. He sighed. Hey, please, can you keep it down? I pleaded, realizing that there was so little that I could do to find my escape. I was certain that he was buying my lie, and I feared my nerves were betraying me in front of him. I tried to imagine what was in his hand behind the door, stealing furtive glances at the impenetrable boundary. I'm sure you'll have no further trouble with noise tonight. He smiled fully, and his eyes glazed like one intoxicated. He wasn't buying it. He had the feeling that I knew, and my stomach tightened with nerves. All I had with me was the key to my apartment, and I was staring harm, or possibly death, in the face. Silence lingered, translating our speechlessness to each other. It made me hot to be so desperate. I kicked my foot forward at the door, and his blood-stained baton fell out of his hand. My stomach crumpled on itself, but I managed to lurch forward. I grappled him to the ground and turned the key properly into my grip. Focused, I stabbed down on his throat repeatedly. At that moment, when I watched him struggle for his life, he gagged and blood escaped his mouth. I finally understood his thrill.